Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a truly remarkable book, Ian Buruma's Year Zero, A History of 1945.
It's a fantastic read.
It really is. And what Buruma captures so well is this jarring paradox of 1945. On one hand, the end of the biggest war ever, triggering these huge global celebrations, a real lust for liberty, as the book puts it.
Absolutely, this massive wave of euphoria of release. But then at the very same time, you've got just immense human suffering, terrible hatreds boiling over, and a world that's literally a pile of rubble.
That contradiction is right at the heart of it.
Exactly, and Buruma explores it brilliantly.
And he brings such a unique perspective. He's a Dutch scholar, cross-cultural background, and he's really interested in these forgotten corners of history.
Right.
And in Year Zero, he doesn't just focus on the big names. He boldly pulls back the veil, showing the messy, often uncomfortable reality for ordinary people in that year.
Yeah, it's not a simple heroes and villains narrative. One of his core ideas is that 1945 wasn't just about victory. He calls it Year Zero.
Year Zero. Tell us more about that.
Well, he argues it's the starting point of our modern world, the new world, as he says. It was this incredibly volatile moment where the old world order was shattering and something new was emerging, but shaped by minds awakened by the baptism of shellfire. A real collision point.
Okay, so with that Year Zero idea in mind, our mission today is to explore what that beginning really looked like. What were conditions like? How did people try to clear the rubble, both physical and human? And what efforts were made to stop it all from happening again?
Sounds good. We can sort of follow the book structure, the immediate aftermath, the clearing process, and then the attempts to prevent recurrence.
Perfect. So let's start right there, the immediate aftermath. Those global conditions, you mentioned celebrations, and they were, well, almost competitive, weren't they?
Yeah, a little bit. You had the British toasting, but then Stalin apparently wanted VE Day delayed to May 9th. He was furious that Eisenhower had accepted Germany's surrender sort of privately first.
Like political maneuvering even then.
Always.
Yeah.
But beyond the leaders, the popular reaction was just overwhelming. In the Netherlands, people were crying, hugging soldiers, throwing flowers from their gardens onto Allied vehicles.
Wow.
500,000 people flooded the streets in New York. Parisians singing the Marseillaise on Place de la République. Englishmen making human pyramids outside Buckingham Palace.
Human pyramids. Apparently so. And in Moscow, on May 9th, people were dancing in the streets, some still in pajamas, just shouting, "Victory, victory." It was this huge collective sigh of relief.
Pure joy, it sounds like. But the book digs into another aspect of this liberation, doesn't it? Something more complex about relationships. Sex.
Ah, yes. That's a really fascinating and sometimes uncomfortable part of the story. Across liberated Europe, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, the situation was stark. Local men were often, malnourished, demoralized after years of occupation. They'd lost status.
Okay.
And then in come the Allied soldiers,
Yeah.
Americans, Canadians, healthy, well-fed, pockets full of money, cigarettes. Compared to the local men, they seemed like heroes, saviors even. The book has that quote from the Dutch woman, right?
It does. Let's face it, after what we had been through, the Canadians looked delicious. Women saw these soldiers as saints, Christ, and saviors. It was a powerful mix of relief, gratitude, and, attraction to vitality after so much deprivation.
That must have caused some real social upheaval.
Absolutely. Buruma mentions the French writer Benoît Groult's novel, Je n'ai la Quatremain. It describes her American hunting exploits and even calls nightclubs slave markets, but where the slaves were the conquering heroes. It's provocative language, but it captures that intense dynamic.
So, a surge in relationships, marriages.
Definitely. Fertility rates jumped. Lots of international marriages. It shows how these really primal forces were unleashed after years of suppression. Old rules just broke down, especially with the power imbalance between victors and the liberated populations. It's a raw look at humanity.
A very different picture emerges in the defeated nations, though, particularly Japan.
Right, a stark contrast. In Japan, there was immense fear of Allied troops, partly fueled by guilt over Japan's own wartime atrocities. The government actually legalized prostitution and publicly recruited women as comfort women.
As a patriotic duty. That's horrifying.
It is. It was framed that way to try and contain potential violence by channeling it into organized brothels, like the International Palace. A truly sordid business, as the book calls it.
Given those fears, how did the Allied troops actually behave?
Well, often surprisingly better than feared, or certainly better than the Japanese soldiers had behaved in occupied territories. Buruma quotes a Japanese woman who wrote about the Allies being courteous, friendly, carefree, and contrasted it sharply with the haughty, mean Japanese soldier.
Lost it. And in Germany.
Similar dynamics in some ways. Despite official non-fraternization rules, German women often ignored them. One waitress apparently said German men were too soft, not men anymore. The appeal of the victor, the healthy soldier, seems to have crossed enemy lines.
So this burst of, let's call it complicated liberation, provided maybe a fleeting sense of something positive. But Buruma contrasts this sharply with the grim reality gripping almost everywhere: famine.
Yes! The celebrations faded quickly when people looked at the ruins. Food was desperately scarce. Black markets weren't just shady dealings, they were essential for survival.
Like in France, where even professors admitted they couldn't live without them.
Exactly, everyone relied on them, and this scarcity had horrific consequences. You mentioned Bergen-Belsen earlier.
Right, the tragedy where Allied rations actually killed survivors.
Yeah, about 2,000 people died. The Allies meant well, bringing rich food, like ham and bacon, but the survivors' stomachs were so damaged by starvation they just couldn't digest it. It just went right through them. An awful, awful outcome.
Unimaginable.
And this wasn't isolated. Public services collapsed in Germany and Japan. There's a story from a Japanese novel, American Hijik, about airlifted food. People were so hungry, they mistook dark tea leaves for edible seaweed, hijiki, but ate them anyway.
And connecting this back, there's that terrible irony about the relief supplies themselves.
Yeah, the corruption. Supplies meant for starving people were often grabbed by senior military officers and their civilian cronies, then sold on the black market.
Making former war criminals rich.
In some cases, yes. Insanely rich, Buruma writes. Ordinary people had to pay huge sums for aid that should have been free. It just adds another layer of bitterness and injustice to the suffering.
It sounds like a powder keg. And the book shows that this did explode into revenge, often brutal revenge.
It really did. You had former concentration camp prisoners turning on German civilians, sometimes torturing them, patients in hospitals trying to stab German nurses. Understandable rage, perhaps, but still horrifying.
And the Soviets.
The Soviet retribution in Germany was particularly horrific. Systematic rape was widespread. They saw it as direct vengeance for being labeled Untermenschen, subhumans, by the Nazis. There's a chilling quote from a Soviet officer about soldiers making it hot for those Herrenvolk women.
Just devastating.
Yeah.
Massacres too, right? Like in Czechoslovakia.
Yes, in one instance, over 10,000 German civilians herded into a football stadium and just gunned down. It was vengeance on a mass scale.
But Buruma pushes further, making an even more disturbing point. It wasn't always just the oppressed hitting back at the oppressor.
Oh, and this is crucial and deeply uncomfortable. He highlights persecution inflicted by the suffering people on more vulnerable groups.
Like Jewish survivors facing renewed anti-Semitism.
Exactly, especially in places like Poland. After surviving the unimaginable, some Jewish people returning home were met with hostility, violence, even murder. There was this warped belief they must be extremely rich, people digging in mass graves looking for gold teeth.
That's beyond words.
It reveals something dark about human nature under extreme stress. Suffering doesn't automatically ennoble. It can twist people, turn them against anyone perceived as weaker or different, even fellow victims. This human evil, as Buruma explores it, this hidden turmoil, was also a direct product of this war.
Okay, so we have this landscape of chaos. Fleeting joy, famine, revenge, deep trauma. Which brings us to part 2. The immense task of clearing that rubble, dealing with millions of displaced people, trying to build some order.
A staggering task. For Jewish survivors, finding a place, any place, was fraught. We mentioned the anti-Semitism they faced even after liberation. That story of the Dutch woman on the bus.
Telling a survivor, if only they'd kept you in the concentration camp. Just unbelievable cruelty.
It reflects this bizarre prejudice documented in another source Buruma mentions, driving out the tyranny, that Jews were somehow shrewd, had hidden wealth, weren't really victims like others, just vile.
And what about the Japanese returning home? Millions of them, right?
6.5 million, scattered across Asia and the Pacific. Their return was incredibly difficult too, but for different reasons. After Japan's atrocities were exposed, they weren't welcomed back as heroes. They were seen as abject losers, even homicidal fiends by their own people.
A total reversal.
Complete reversal. Kamikaze pilots ended up as black market hoodlums. Major generals found sleeping rough with beggars. Their world, their status, had utterly collapsed, utterly stripped away.
So you have millions of individuals adrift, traumatized, and then there's the huge political task, rebuilding governance internationally. The world was, as the book says, an utter mess.
Totally. Think about the Potsdam Conference. Trying to create a new political order, figure out how to prosecute war criminals when legal systems were shattered or compromised. How do you even begin to deal with potentially millions of crimes across continents with no functioning infrastructure?
Laying foundations on quicksand.
That's a good way to put it. It was an incredibly complex, messy, difficult process just to start building anything stable.
Okay, so we've seen the destruction, the immediate fallout, the first steps towards clearing the mess. Let's move to part 3. The attempts to actually prevent history from repeating itself. That powerful slogan from Buchenwald comes to mind.
Never again, right. Plastered over the infamous Jedem das sein Gate. Buruma calls it the life motto of people who survived the war. A desperate plea, really, to build something different.
And this desire fueled some surprising political shifts.
Yeah.
Like in Britain, Churchill's defeat.
Yeah, Clement Attlee winning the July 1945 election was a shock to many. Remember that quote from the French politician? Ingratitude is the characteristic of a strong people.
Why did it happen, though?
Yeah.
Buruma points to class, right?
He does. Deep-seated class issues. In the UK then, 1% owned like 50% of the wealth. Churchill's conservatives represented that upper class. But the working class, who'd done so much of the fighting and the labor...
They weren't going back to that.
Exactly. They rejected the old inequalities, Churchill's laissez-faire ideas, which many blame for the pre-war economic crisis, even seeing it as a cause of Hitler's rise. Attlee's Labour Party promised nationalization, welfare, a different economic future. It offered real hope.
A different economic path is prevention. What about remaking the defeated nations themselves? Germany and Japan.
Big, ambitious projects. In Germany, the Allies tried this re-education effort, using films with graphic images of concentration camps, Nazi atrocities.
How did that go down?
Often badly. Disbelief, denial, rejection. Plus, they'd purged so many ex-Nazi teachers that there were huge shortages. History, geography, English, maths teachers all gone. It was hard to implement effectively.
Sounds like a struggle. Was Japan different?
Yes, significantly smoother, actually. The U.S. approach there was quite savvy. They kept the emperor, the Mikado system, which provided stability and cultural continuity.
But they still held leaders accountable.
Oh, yes. Top generals faced trials. But preserving the emperor helped acceptance. Plus, they pushed democratic reforms, crucially provided lenient supplies, which eased the famine. And, well, American culture was actually quite welcomed.
A strategic success, then.
It really laid the foundation for the post-war alliance and Japan's economic recovery, especially during the Cold War. A very different outcome than in Germany, initially at least.
And underpinning all this was the dream of global governance. That stat about Americans wanting a world organization.
80%, an overwhelming majority wanting the U.S. to join a world organization with police power. People were desperate for something to prevent another global catastrophe.
And this wasn't a new idea born purely in '45.
No, the seeds were sown earlier. The Atlantic Charter, back in 1941 with Churchill and Roosevelt, already aimed for some kind of world organization. It came out of the depths of the war itself.
Leading finally to the UN.
Exactly. Drafted in San Francisco in the spring of '45, formally established just a few months later, explicitly created, as you said, to maintain world order and prevent history from repeating itself. The ultimate expression of never again.
So we've traced this incredible journey through 1945. From that first explosion of joy, tangled with utter devastation.
Through the famine, the revenge, the millions displaced.
To these really determined efforts to rebuild not just cities, but societies, and create structures for lasting peace.
And the book ends with such a powerful image, doesn't it? New Year's Eve, 1945. Buruma imagines the end of the bloody old world, a future with no barbed wire, no concentration camps, and no killings. People hearing firecrackers, not sniper fire.
That image of year zero again, a threshold moment, immense pain, but also this profound hope for a clean slate.
Yeah, a chance to start anew.
But that leaves us, and you listening, with a really big question, I think. Thinking about everything we've discussed, the deep scars, the trauma, the pull between vengeance and peace, all those efforts to reset, can history ever really wipe the slate clean? Or do the echoes of a year like 1945 of year zero inevitably linger and shape everything that follows? What does never again truly mean for us now, generations later, when we still see so many familiar struggles around the world?
It's the question that hangs over the whole book, and maybe over our whole era. Does the past ever really let go?